All right, so you reached out because Palantir, that company, the one doing all that AI and data analytics stuff, their stock's been kind of on a slide lately.
Yeah, it has.
And you want to know, like, hey, is this a bad sign or is this a chance to buy low? You know what I mean?
Right.
So we're going to dig into this article called Palantir's Plunge, Panic or Opportunity, Why Long-Term Investors Should Stay the Course. Hopefully it'll give us some answers.
Sounds good.
So one of the things that's got people worried is this talk about cuts to defense spending. Palantir, they do a lot of work with the government, right?
Yeah, they do, but it's actually interesting because, they're not just relying on those government contracts anymore. They're really pushing into the commercial side of things, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, their revenue's pretty evenly split between the two, like almost 50-50 at this point.
Huh. I knew they were working with some businesses, but I didn't realize it was that much of their business.
Yeah. So even if the defense budget gets cut, by that proposed 8%, it wouldn't be like a total disaster for Palantir.
That's a good point. So those headlines about the cuts might be making things sound worse than they actually are.
Could be. Plus, you got to remember those initial proposed cuts almost always get watered down during negotiations. Analysts are thinking the final number might be closer to 3 or 4%.
Okay, so not as scary.
Not as scary at all. But here's another thing. Even if those cuts do happen, Palantir's in a good spot. They're not just selling like tanks and missiles, They're focused on this really advanced AI stuff.
Like what kind of stuff?
Think like autonomous drones that can scope out a battlefield systems that can predict what the enemy's going to do based on tons of data. Tools that can help you manage resources in the middle of a fight. Stuff that's basically essential for how wars are fought these days.
Wow, so they're like the brains behind the operation, not just the brawn.
Exactly. And governments aren't going to want to cut funding for that kind of tech, especially with, China and other countries racing to build up their own AI capabilities.
Yeah, it's like an AI arms race.
Right. One analyst in the article said it perfectly. Cuts are unlikely to target mission-critical AI investments. Palantir isn't selling boots or bullets. It's selling the future of warfare.
Okay, I see your point about the defense spending stuff, but I got to be honest, whenever I see a CEO selling off a bunch of their company's stock, it makes me nervous. And Alex Karp, Palantir's CEO, he's been doing just that.
Right. I get why people would be worried about that. But let's think about this for a sec. Alex Karp, he's been selling shares for years. Even back in like 2023, 2024, when the stock was going crazy, like from $6 to over 120.
He's still selling back then.
Yep. If people had freaked out and sold their shares based on what he was doing, they would have missed out on some huge gains.
So maybe it's not as big a red flag as it seems at first.
Maybe not. The article makes a good point. The real question is, has Palantir's role in AI or defense changed in a fundamental way? And from what we've talked about so far, the answer seems to be no.
Yeah, you're right. It's probably better to focus on how the company's actually doing instead of trying to read into every move the CEO makes.
Exactly. There's this one quote in the article that I love. One of the analysts basically said, "Let the man cash out. He's been building this company for 2 decades."
Haha, fair enough. Can't blame him for wanting to enjoy some of his success. But, okay, let's be real here. Even if Palantir's doing well as a company, their stock is known for being super volatile. I mean, it's been all over the place. $10 in 2020, $35 in 2021, then crashed down to $6.40 in 2023, and then shot up to $120 in 2024.
Yeah, that's quite a ride. Makes you wonder how anyone can make sense of it, right?
Exactly.
Well, the thing is, volatility kind of comes with the territory with a company like Palantir. They're in these cutting-edge, high-growth fields, and that often means big swings in the stock price. You see the same thing with a lot of companies that are pushing the boundaries and changing the game.
So it's like a trade-off. You got to be willing to stomach the ups and downs if you want to be a part of something that could be really revolutionary.
Pretty much. But the good news is there are ways to manage that volatility and make smart decisions, even if you're not glued to the stock market all day, every day.
Like what?
Well, the article talks about something called dollar cost averaging.
Dollar cost average.
It's actually a pretty simple idea, but it can be really powerful.
Okay, I'm listening.
So instead of trying to time the market perfectly, which, let's be honest, almost no one can do, you just invest a set amount of money at regular intervals, no matter what the stock price is doing at that moment.
So like putting $100 into Palantir every month, whether the stock's up or down.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is that when the stock's down like it is now, you're actually buying more shares for your money. And when it's up, you're buying fewer shares, and you're still consistently building up your position over time.
That makes sense. So it kind of takes the emotion out of it and helps you get a better average price over time.
Exactly. And the article even gives this rule of thumb that I thought was interesting. They say to double your investment when the stock drops 20% below its recent high, and then ease up on buying as the price goes back up.
Interesting. So with Palantir around the $100 right now, this could be a good time to get in for people who think the company's going to do well in the long run.
It's something to think about for sure. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, I think we need to take a closer look at Palantir's move into the commercial world. It's one thing to have a strong foothold in government and defense, but can they really compete with all the big dogs in the business world?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's dive into that in part two. All right, so we've talked about how Palantir is doing with the government and defense stuff, but now I'm really curious about this whole commercial side of their business. Can a company that's so focused on like classified data and military stuff really make it in the regular business world?
It's a good question, right? And a lot of investors are wondering the same thing. But here's the thing. They're not just kind of testing the waters with this commercial stuff. They're going all in.
Really? Like what kind of businesses are they trying to work with?
Oh, they're going after a whole bunch of different sectors: healthcare, energy, manufacturing, even finance. And what's cool is they're not just selling like some off the shelf software package. They're actually customizing their AI platforms to solve very specific problems for these businesses.
Okay, so can you give me an example? Like what would that look like in real life?
Sure. Let's say you're a big hospital system and you're having all these problems with your supply chain. Like you're always running out of stuff, or you have way too much inventory just sitting around taking up space. Palantir could come in, analyze all your data, everything from patient records to staffing levels to supplier contracts and all that. And then they could build a model that basically predicts what you're going to need and when, so you can optimize your whole supply chain.
Wow, so they're taking the same kind of data analysis they use for like intelligence gathering and using it to make hospitals run better.
Exactly. And it can have a huge impact. They've helped hospitals save money, improve patient care, even save lives by making sure the right supplies get to the right people at the right time.
That's pretty amazing. So I'm starting to see how this technology could be really valuable for a ton of different industries.
Right. And the thing is, the commercial markets are massive. We're talking trillions of dollars in potential revenue. So even if Palantir just gets a small piece of that, it could really boost their growth.
That's a good point. It makes you wonder if all the focus on their government work is kind of overshadowing this huge opportunity they have in the business world.
It's definitely worth thinking about. The article didn't go into a ton of detail about the financials of their commercial business, but they did mention some big partnerships they've landed with companies like BP and Rio Tinto. And those aren't just small-time deals. Those are the kind of deals that could really move the needle for Palantir.
Okay, so it sounds like they're making some real progress in the business world. But can they really compete with the big tech giants out there? The Googles and Microsofts of the world that have been dominating the software market forever.
That's a fair question, and it's one that Palantir is definitely thinking about. But they actually have a couple of advantages. First of all, their technology is really powerful. I mean, their AI platforms can handle huge amounts of data and incredibly complex situations in a way that a lot of traditional software just can't.
So they're bringing some serious tech to the table.
Yeah. And second, their approach to working with clients is different. A lot of tech companies try to sell you a one-size-fits-all solution, but Palantir is much more hands-on. They work closely with their clients to really understand their needs, and then they build a custom solution that addresses those specific challenges.
So it's more like a partnership than just a customer-vendor relationship.
Exactly. And that can be really appealing to businesses that need a more strategic partner to help them navigate all this digital stuff.
I'm starting to see Palantir in a whole new light now. It's not just a government contractor. It's a company that could really become a major player in the whole tech world.
That's a sharp observation, and it's something that the article didn't really explore as much as I thought they would.
It's interesting because in a way, this push into the commercial world could be seen as a way for Palantir to diversify their business.
That's a really good point. By building up a strong presence in the business world, they're basically protecting themselves from any future problems with government spending. They're creating multiple ways to grow, and they're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Right. It's like they're building a more stable business that can handle all the ups and downs of the economy and politics.
Exactly. And that kind of long-term thinking is something that investors should be looking for. But we've talked a lot about the rational side of investing, but we can't forget about the emotional side. Fear and greed can really mess with our judgment, especially when it comes to a stock like Palantir that's so volatile.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the hype or freak out when you see the stock dropping.
The article makes a good point about this. It says that emotional reactions are the enemy of good returns. If you panic and sell as soon as things get a little shaky, you might miss out on big gains in the long run. And if you get too excited and buy when the stock is at its highest, you could lose a lot of money when it inevitably drifts back down.
Yeah, it's like trying to time the waves when you're surfing. You're more likely to wipe out than to catch the perfect wave.
Perfect analogy. And that's why having a clear investment strategy like the dollar cost averaging we talked about can be so helpful. It takes the emotion out of it and helps you make smarter decisions.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about why Palantir's stock has been dropping their move into the commercial world and how to keep our emotions in check when we're investing. I bet our listeners are ready for some final thoughts and maybe a little something to think about. What do you say we wrap things up in part 3?
Sounds good to me.
All right, so we've really dug into Palantir, their strengths, their weaknesses, what they're trying to do outside of those government contracts.
Yeah, it's been a pretty thorough look.
We've gone from those worries about defense spending cuts to their move into the business world and even how our own emotions can affect how we invest.
We've peeled back the layers, I think.
Exactly. So as we wrap up here, what are the big takeaways our listeners should remember when they're thinking about investing in Palantir?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that their core business is still really strong. Their AI is a big part of some of the most important things that governments do around the world, and that's not going to change overnight.
Yeah, they're not just selling software. They're providing like mission-critical stuff that helps governments make better decisions, protect their people, keep the country safe.
Exactly. And on top of that, they're really making a push into the commercial world, going after those big industries like healthcare, energy, finance. They're showing that their tech can change things in the business world just like it has in government and defense.
Yeah, it's like they're taking those same tools they used to fight terrorism, and now they're using them to make hospitals run better, help energy companies with their supply chains, even help banks catch fraud.
It's pretty amazing. And it makes you think they could really become one of the big names in tech.
So their business is doing well, they're finding new ways to make money, and they're working in industries that were growing like crazy. But what about this recent drop in their stock? Is it really a chance to buy, or is there something else going on that we should be worried about?
That's the big question, right? And of course, we can't predict the future, but based on everything we've talked about, it seems like this dip could just be a temporary thing. Those defense cuts might not be as bad as people think. And Alex Karp's selling off some of his stock. Well, it might seem a little weird at first, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's not confident in the company.
So it's like a storm came through and scared some people off, but the ship is still sailing strong.
Exactly. And for people who are in it for the long haul, who believe in what Palantir's trying to do, this could be a good time to buy while the price is down.
Especially if they use that dollar cost averaging strategy to smooth out the ups and downs.
Definitely dollar cost average is a great way to handle these kinds of situations. It takes the emotion out of it and helps you build up your investment over time.
It's like keeping a steady hand on the wheel even when things get rough. But at the end of the day, whether or not to invest in Palantir is a personal decision.
Absolutely. It depends on how much risk you're comfortable with, what your goals are, and what you think about the company's future.
So for our listener who's been with us on this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought.
Do you think Palantir is going to be one of the big players in the AI and data world in 5, 10, 20 years?
Think about everything we've talked about today. Do your own research, see what other people are saying, and come to your own conclusions.
And remember, investing is about more than just making money. It's about learning and exploring new ideas.
That's a great point. So stay curious and enjoy the ride. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Palantir.